The metallic taste of fear permeated my mouth as I stared at the confidential file in my trembling hands. The words danced before my eyes, forming sentences that my mind refused to process. Agreement on mutual cooperation between the government of the United States of America and the representatives of the reptilian species. The date on the letterhead chilled me to the bone. July 8, 1947, the day after the infamous Roswell incident. My name is Dr. Malcolm Hayes, and until yesterday I was just another mediocre scientist working on an obscure Department of Defense project. Today, I'm a marked man, racing against time to expose the most shocking truth in human history. It all started with a mistaken email. A flaw in the security system allowed top-secret documents to reach my inbox. At first, I thought it was some kind of elaborate joke or loyalty test. But as I delved deeper into the contents, the terrible reality began to reveal itself. The file detailed an agreement signed between the American government and an alien race that called itself the Sovereigns. They were not the little gray men from science fiction films, but reptilian creatures with an intelligence vastly superior to our own. The deal was simple and terrifying. In exchange for advanced technology, the U.S. would provide resources and a secret base of operations deep in the New Mexico desert. I spent the whole night devouring every word of those documents, my stomach turning with each new revelation. The Sovereigns were not newcomers to Earth. They had been here for millennia, hiding in the shadows, secretly manipulating the course of human history. Roswell was not an accident, but a planned contact to establish a formal alliance with the emerging post-war superpower. As the sun rose, I realized that I couldn't keep this information to myself. The world needed to know. But how could I, a mid-level scientist with no connections or influence, expose such a vast and well-protected conspiracy? That's when I heard it. A subtle, almost imperceptible sound coming from the corridor outside my apartment. Footsteps, slow, calculated, inhuman. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my system. They knew. Somehow they had discovered that I had access to the information. With trembling hands, I quickly copied the files onto a USB stick and hid it in the lining of my jacket. There was no time to think of an elaborate plan. My survival instinct took over. I quietly opened the bedroom window and stepped out onto the fire escape, the cold metal biting into my bare toes. As I hurried down the steps, I heard the sound of my door being kicked in. Low, hissing voices filled the air, confirming my worst fears. It wasn't human agents after me, but the Sovereigns themselves. I reached the dark alley behind the building and ran as I had never run before. The rough asphalt hurt my feet, but the pain was insignificant compared to the terror that drove me. I turned corners at random, plunging deeper into the urban labyrinth, praying to lose my pursuers. After what seemed like an eternity, I found refuge in a 24-hour internet cafe. With my hands still trembling, I plugged in the USB stick and started sending files to every newspaper and news site I could think of. I knew it was a desperate move that would probably be dismissed as the ravings of a lunatic, but it was my only hope of getting the truth out. While the files were being sent, my mind wandered, trying to process everything I had discovered. How could we have been so blind? How long would this farce continue? And what would happen when the public finally learned the truth? The sound of sirens in the distance brought me back to reality. I couldn't sit still for long. I left the internet cafe and plunged back into the night, my brain working frantically to formulate a plan. It was then that I remembered Robert, my old college friend who was now working as an investigative journalist. If there was anyone who could help me expose this conspiracy, it was him. With a new sense of purpose, I directed my steps to the other side of the city, where Robert lived. The city looked different now, threatening. Every shadow could hide a reptilian agent. Every passing car could be following me. Paranoia? Maybe. But after what I had discovered, paranoia seemed perfectly rational. I arrived at Robert's building just before dawn. I rang the bell incessantly until I heard his sleepy voice on the intercom. "Who is it?" "Robert, it's me, Malcolm. I need your help. It's a matter of life and death." There was a pause. Then the door buzzed, allowing me to enter. I climbed the stairs every 2 steps, my heart hammering in my chest. When Robert opened the door, his eyes widened at the sight of my disheveled state. "My God, Malcolm, what's happened to you?" "Robert, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen to me. The safety of the world depends on it." And so, in the dim light of Robert's apartment, I began to unravel the web of lies and conspiracies I had discovered. As I spoke, I saw Robert's initial skepticism turn to shock and then to grim determination. This is unbelievable," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "If it's true, it's the greatest story in human history." "It's true," I insisted, handing him the flash drive, "and we need to expose it before it's too late." Robert nodded slowly, the magnitude of the situation clearly weighing on him. "Okay, we'll do it, but we need to be careful. If what you're saying is true, we're dealing with forces beyond our comprehension." As Robert started making calls and preparing an article, I allowed myself a moment of relief. Finally, the truth would come out. But part of me knew that this was only the beginning. The sovereigns would not give up easily, and the battle for humanity's survival was just beginning. I looked out of the window, watching the rising sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was a new day, perhaps the last day of humanity's ignorance. What the future held, I didn't know, but I was determined to fight to the end to expose the truth, no matter what the cost. Robert's apartment became a makeshift fortress in the hours that followed. Curtains closed, phones switched off, a palpable atmosphere of tension in the air. While Robert worked frantically on his computer, turning my chaotic account into a coherent article, I couldn't stop looking out of the window, expecting at any moment to see sinister figures converging on the building. "Malcolm!" Robert's voice snapped me out of my dark thoughts. "I need you to take a look at this." I approached the screen, my eyes scanning the lines of the article. It was surreal to see my experience translated into words, the naked truth laid bare for the world to see, but something was bothering me. "Robert," I began hesitantly, "don't you think that sounds, well, crazy?" He let out a heavy sigh. "Honestly, yes, it does. But we have evidence, Malcolm. The files you brought, they're authentic. I've carried out some preliminary checks and, although I can't confirm 100% without further investigation, all indications point to the legitimacy of the documents." A shiver ran down my spine. Part of me still hoped that this was all an elaborate nightmare, that I would wake up in my bed sweaty but safe. Robert's confirmation solidified the terrible reality of the situation. "What now?" I asked, feeling the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. "Now," Robert said, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. "We publish. I've sent the article to my contacts at several major newspapers and news sites. I've also prepared a detailed post for social media. Once I press send, there's no turning back." I swallowed, fear and anticipation mixing in my stomach. "Do it," I finally said. With a click, the truth was released to the world. For a few moments, there was only silence, like the calm before the storm. And then chaos erupted. Robert's phone started ringing incessantly. Notifications exploded on his computer. The world was reacting, and reacting fast. "This is crazy!" exclaimed Robert, his eyes wide as he scrolled through a sea of responses. "Some are calling it an elaborate hoax. Others are calling for immediate investigations. There are even reports of strange goings-on at military installations." But we didn't have time to process the public's reaction. A deafening bang shook the building, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering on the lower floors. "They've found us," I whispered, panic overwhelming me. Robert jumped up from his chair, grabbing a pre-prepared backpack. "Escape plan, now!" We ran into the corridor, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing up the staircase. Not down, but up. Robert guided me to the roof, where a makeshift bridge connected his building to the neighboring one. "Did you plan that?" I asked, impressed, as we crossed the precarious passage. "Always be prepared for the worst," he replied with a tense smile. We walked down the neighboring building, emerging into a side street. The city was abuzz. Sirens sounded everywhere. Helicopters cut through the sky. And in the streets, people looked at their phones with expressions of shock and disbelief. "We need to split up," said Robert, handing me an envelope. "Here are false documents and some money. There's an address for a safe place. Meet me there in 48 hours. Before I could protest, he disappeared into the crowd. I stood there, momentarily paralyzed, before the survival instinct urged me to move. The next few hours were a blur of streets, alleys, and public transport. I avoided cameras, changed direction at random, always looking over my shoulder. The city I had known all my life suddenly seemed like a hostile labyrinth, every corner potentially hiding a deadly threat. It was during a pause to catch my breath in a dark alley that I noticed the sky was different. Strange clouds were forming, with patterns that defied atmospheric logic, and there was a hum in the air, almost imperceptible but undeniably present. My cell phone, which I had kept switched off for safety, vibrated in my pocket. Hesitantly, I turned it on. The screen was immediately flooded with notifications, but one in particular caught my eye, a national emergency alert. With trembling fingers, I opened the message. "Attention all citizens, stay in your homes, do not panic. An official declaration will be made shortly by the President of the United States." My heart sank. This was real, it was happening. The veil of lies that had covered our reality for decades was being brutally ripped away. A high-pitched scream cut through the air, followed by more. I looked up at the sky and my blood ran cold. Huge ships, with designs that defied our understanding of engineering, were beginning to materialize above the clouds. The sovereigns were no longer hiding. I forced my legs to move, running in no particular direction, just trying to get away from the city center. The streets were in chaos, people running in all directions, abandoned cars, the sound of breaking glass and alarms going off everywhere. In the midst of the chaos, I caught fragments of conversations and shouts. "It's the end of the world. They're here to save us. It's all the government's fault. We need to fight." Humanity was divided, confused, terrified, and I was responsible for unleashing it all. As I ran, a terrible doubt began to form in my mind. Had I made a colossal mistake? Maybe the deal, as disturbing as it was necessary. Maybe there was a reason for all the secrecy. But there was no time for regrets now. I had opened Pandora's box, and now I had to deal with the consequences. Night fell over the city in chaos, the lights of the alien ships replacing the stars. I found refuge in an abandoned building, hiding in a dark corner, trying to process everything that had happened. My cell phone vibrated again. It was time for the presidential address. With my heart in my throat, I turned it on. The president's shaky image appeared on the screen. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and resignation. "My fellow Americans," he began, his voice failing slightly, "today we face the greatest revelation in human history." As the speech went on, confirming the existence of the sovereigns and decades of secret cooperation, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Whatever happened next, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. Outside, the hum of the alien ships grew louder. Humanity's long night was just beginning, and I was at the epicenter of the storm that I myself had unleashed. The president's speech still echoed in my mind as I wandered through the dark streets of the city. The initial chaos had turned into an oppressive silence, interrupted only by the occasional hum of the alien ships hovering above. His words, a mixture of confession, justification, and plea for calm, seemed to have paralyzed the nation. I couldn't stand by. The address Robert had given me burned in my pocket like a beacon of hope. There were still hours until our appointment, but the inactivity was unbearable. I decided to head for the location, trusting that the darkness and collective shock would provide me with some cover. The streets were strangely deserted, a stark contrast to the pandemonium of hours ago. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of pale faces peering out of the windows, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. The air was charged with an electric tension, as if the very fabric of reality was about to tear. It was then that I noticed something strange. Amidst the desolation, there was movement. Hooded figures were moving with purpose, converging on a common point. Intrigued and apprehensive, I decided to follow them, keeping a safe distance. They led me to an old warehouse on the edge of town. The building looked abandoned, but there was a palpable energy emanating from it. I approached cautiously, finding a broken window through which I could peek inside. What I saw took my breath away. Dozens of people were gathered in a circle, their faces illuminated by candles. In the center, a tall, imposing figure spoke in low, urgent tones. Even in the dim light, I could discern the shiny scales of his skin and the reptilian eyes that scanned the crowd. A sovereign. In the flesh, or was it scales, openly interacting with humans? I forced my ears to pick up the words. For millennia, we have guided humanity from the shadows, but now, with the truth exposed, we need allies. You, the chosen ones, will be the bridge between our species. My blood ran cold. This went beyond a simple government deal. It was a large-scale infiltration, a network of human collaborators spread throughout society. One of those present raised his voice, trembling with emotion. But what about the agreement with the government? Why do you need us if you're already in control? The sovereign let out a sound that could have been a laugh or a wheeze. The agreement was just the beginning, a temporary necessity. Now, with the world in chaos, it's time for us to take our true place as rulers of this planet. I swallowed, the horror of the situation hitting me in waves. It wasn't just a government conspiracy that I had exposed. It was the prelude to a full-scale invasion. I backed away slowly, my mind spinning with the implications of what I had witnessed. But in my haste, I didn't notice the shard of glass under my foot. The crack sounded deafening in the silence of the night. Inside the warehouse, conversation ceased abruptly. I heard rapid movements approaching the window. I ran like never before, fear pushing my physical limits. Behind me, I heard screams and the sound of pursuers. I turned corners at random, jumped fences, plunged into dark alleys, my heart threatening to explode in my chest. After what seemed like an eternity, the sounds of pursuit subsided. Exhausted and panting, I allowed myself a break, hiding behind a dumpster. It was then that I noticed I was only a few blocks away from the address Robert had given me. With trembling legs, I forced myself to continue. The place was an old apartment building, its worn facade blending in perfectly with the decaying cityscape. I climbed the creaking stairs, each step echoing menacingly. I reached the apartment indicated and knocked on the door, my heart still pounding in my chest. Seconds dragged by like hours until finally the door opened. But it wasn't Robert. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes and gray hair stared at me with a mixture of fear and resignation. "You must be Malcolm," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Robert told me you were coming. Come in quickly." Confused, but grateful for the refuge, I entered the apartment. The interior was Spartan, with little furniture and several boxes stacked in the corners. "Where's Robert?" I asked, the anxiety evident in my voice. The woman, who introduced herself as Sarah, lowered her eyes. Robert didn't make it. They got him before he could get here." My world fell apart. Robert, my friend, my ally in this madness, was in their hands. And it was all my fault. Sarah must have noticed my despair. She put a comforting hand on my shoulder. But he managed to pass on crucial information to me before he was captured. Information that could change everything. She walked over to one of the boxes, rummaging through its contents until she pulled out a thick folder. "This," she said, handing it to me, "is what Robert discovered in the secret government files. The true nature of the deal with the sovereigns." With trembling hands, I opened the folder. The first few pages confirmed much of what I already knew. The Roswell incident, the initial agreement, the exchange of technology. But as I went on, my eyes widened in horror. The agreement wasn't just about cooperation or the exchange of knowledge. It was a long-term plan for the gradual subjugation of humanity. The sovereigns were not benevolent visitors or even silent partners. They were patient conquerors, using our own greed and thirst for power against us. But there was more. On the last page, a revelation that made my blood run cold. A plan for a catalyzing event, something that would dramatically accelerate the timeline of the invasion. An event that, according to the document, should happen tomorrow. I looked at Sarah, the weight of responsibility crushing me. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes shone with fierce determination. "Now," she said. "We fight, and you, Malcolm, are the key to it all." As the sound of the alien ships grew outside, I realized that my journey was far from over. In fact, the real challenge had only just begun. Sarah's words echoed in my mind as I tried to process everything I had discovered. The folder she had handed me contained information that went beyond my worst suspicions. The sovereigns weren't just patient conquerors, they were architects of a conspiracy so vast and intricate that it made my initial discovery seem trivial in comparison. "Malcolm," Sarah's voice brought me back to reality. "We don't have much time. The catalyzing event mentioned in the documents, we have reason to believe it will be a show of force on a global scale." I swallowed, remembering the huge ships that were now hovering over our cities. "What kind of demonstration?" Sarah hesitated, her eyes reflecting a deep fear. "We believe they plan to disable all electronic technology on the planet for 24 hours. Imagine the chaos, the panic. It would be the perfect pretext for a total takeover." The magnitude of the threat was overwhelming. Billions of lives at risk, civilization on the brink of collapse, and somehow I was the key to stopping it. "But how?" I asked, the frustration evident in my voice. "What can I do against such a powerful force?" Sarah moved quickly to one of the stacked boxes, pulling out a device that looked like a mixture of a laptop and military equipment. "This," she said, "is our secret weapon, a quantum decoder developed by a cell of dissident scientists. With it, we can intercept and decipher the sovereign's communications." My eyes widened as I examined the device. It was clearly a fusion of terrestrial and alien technology, something beyond anything I had ever seen in my years of research. "And that's where you come in, Malcolm," Sarah continued. "Your expertise in cryptography and your knowledge of government protocols are crucial to operating it effectively." Before I could reply, a deafening noise shook the building. Bright lights flooded into the apartment through the gaps in the boarded-up windows. "They found us," hissed Sarah, grabbing the decoder and throwing it into a backpack. "We have to get out of here, now!" We ran to the back door, down a rusty fire escape. The alley was dark, but we could hear the sound of fast-approaching vehicles. "This way," Sarah whispered, guiding me through a series of narrow passages. As we ran, my mind spun. How had they located us so quickly? The answer hit me like a punch in the gut. They must have captured Robert. Guilt and fear threatened to paralyze me, but the instinct to survive drove me on. After what seemed like an eternity of running and hiding, we emerged in an abandoned industrial area. Sarah led me to an old warehouse, its metal structure rising ominously against the night sky. Inside, I was stunned. What looked like an abandoned building from the outside was actually a high-tech operations center. Dozens of people worked at computer stations, maps and diagrams covered the walls, and in the center was a huge holographic table displaying what looked like a real-time map of the Sovereign's activities. "Welcome to the Resistance, Malcolm," said Sarah, a slight smile forming on her tired lips. I was quickly introduced to a series of faces, ex-military, renegade scientists, hackers, even some politicians who had defected on discovering the truth. Each of them had a story, a reason for fighting the alien threat. Dr. Elena Petrova, a Russian astrophysicist, approached urgently. "The decoder," she demanded, holding out her hand. Sarah handed over the device, and Elena immediately connected it to the central system. The holographic screen flashed, a cascade of alien symbols flowing rapidly. "Malcolm," Elena turned to me, her intense eyes fixed on mine. "We need you to decipher this. It's an intercepted transmission from the Sovereign's mothership. We believe it contains the final details of the catalyzing event." I swallowed, the weight of responsibility threatening to crush me. But something inside me grew stronger. All my life, all my training, had prepared me for this moment. I sat down in front of the console, my fingers flying over the keyboard. The alien symbols were complex, but not completely incomprehensible. I began to notice patterns, similarities to advanced terrestrial encryption systems. The hours passed in a blur of codes and calculations. My mind was on edge, pushing itself beyond anything it had ever done before. And then, finally, "I did it!" I shouted, my tiredness momentarily forgotten. The room erupted into frenetic activity. The information I had decoded was terrifying in its precision. The catalyzing event was not just a show of force. It was the beginning of a purge. The Sovereigns planned to systematically eliminate any human they considered a threat to their domination. But there was hope. The transmission also revealed a critical vulnerability in their defense systems. A window of opportunity of just 15 minutes during the catalyst event, when their ships would be concentrating all their energy for the global attack. "That is," said General Hawkins, a stern-looking man who led the Resistance's military operations, "our only chance to counterattack." Plans began to be drawn up quickly, a series of coordinated attacks at key points around the world, taking advantage of the Sovereigns' brief vulnerability. It was risky, almost suicidal, but it was our only hope. As the Resistance mobilized, Sarah pulled me aside. "Malcolm, you've already done more than we could have hoped for, but we need you for one more thing." She handed me a device that looked like an advanced USB stick. "This contains a quantum virus, designed to infiltrate and disable the Sovereign's systems. But to work, it needs to be inserted directly into the mothership." I looked at the small device in my hand, then back at Sarah, comprehension hitting me. "You want me to—" She nodded gravely. "You're the only one with enough knowledge of their systems to navigate the ship and successfully implant the virus." Fear threatened to overwhelm me, but was quickly replaced by fierce determination. I had started all this by exposing the truth. Now it was my responsibility to finish it. "I'll do it," I said firmly. While the final preparations were being made, I looked out of the warehouse window. The huge ships of the Sovereigns loomed menacingly in the sky, their lights pulsing in an alien rhythm. In a few hours, the fate of humanity would be decided, and I would be at the center of it all. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. As the Resistance prepared for their coordinated attacks around the world, I found myself equipped with an experimental camouflage suit and the small device that carried our hopes of victory. Dr. Elena Petrova made the final adjustments to the suit, her deft hands moving with surgical precision. "This should mask its thermal and biological signature," she explained, making it practically invisible to the Sovereign's sensors. "But remember, Malcolm, it's experimental. We don't know how long it will last." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Fear was a constant presence now, an unwelcome but unavoidable companion. Sarah approached, her eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and determination. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I can be," I replied, trying to inject more confidence into my voice than I actually felt. She squeezed my shoulder, a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. "Remember, you just need to get to the central processing core, insert the device, and off you go. Our teams will be ready to extract it as soon as the signal is given." General Hawkins joined us, his face a mask of concentration. "The catalyzing event will begin in exactly 1 hour. Our forces are positioned globally, ready to strike the moment we detect a vulnerability in their defense." I looked at the watch on my wrist, a device specially designed to resist the electromagnetic pulse the Sovereigns would use. 60 minutes. 60 minutes until the possible end of human civilization as we knew it. "It's time," said Sarah, guiding me to the back exit of the warehouse. Outside, a stealth vehicle was waiting for us, its black surface unnaturally absorbing the light. I got in, my heart hammering in my chest. The driver, a former Air Force pilot called Rodriguez, nodded briefly at me before starting the silent engine. As we drove away from the Resistance base, I took one last look at Sarah and the others. Their faces were masks of determination and hope. Hope that now rested heavily on my shoulders. The journey to the infiltration point was a blur of deserted streets and threatening skies. The huge ships of the Sovereigns seemed even bigger now, their metallic surfaces reflecting the lights of the city in a strange and alien way. Rodriguez stopped the vehicle in a dark alley, a few blocks from where one of the smaller ships had landed. "This is as close as I can get without being detected," he said. "The rest of the way's up to you, buddy." I nodded, checking the equipment once more. The device with the virus was secure, the camouflage suit activated. It was now or never. I stepped out into the night, my footsteps silent as I approached the alien ship. As I got closer, the enormity of my task threatened to paralyze me. How could I, a mere scientist, hope to infiltrate such advanced technology? But there was no time for doubt. The watch on my wrist showed that there were only 45 minutes until the catalyzing event began. I reached the base of the ship, its smooth, impenetrable surface rising up before me like a metallic mountain. It was then that I noticed small ripples on the surface, almost imperceptible, entry points camouflaged to human eyes. Taking a deep breath, I reached out and touched one of these points. To my surprise and relief, my hand went through the surface as if it were water. Without hesitation, I dived in completely. The interior of the ship was a biomechanical nightmare. Pulsating corridors that seemed almost alive, strange lights that changed color in incomprehensible patterns. The air was dense, charged with an alien odor that made my stomach turn. Guided by the schematics we had deciphered, I began to navigate the ship's labyrinths. Every step was an agony of tension, waiting to be discovered at any moment. Then I heard it, footsteps, not mine, but something different, heavy, rhythmic. I pressed myself against a wall, praying that the camouflage suit would work. Two figures walked past me, sovereigns. Up close, they were even more terrifying. Tall, with scaly skin that shone under the alien lights, eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. They spoke in a hissing language that made my bones vibrate. As they passed, I realized that I had been holding my breath. Exhaling slowly, I continued my journey. The central processing core was nearby. I could feel it. The energy in the air was palpable, making my hair stand on end. And then, there it was. A vast chamber, dominated by a pulsating crystalline structure that must have been the alien equivalent of a supercomputer. Lights danced across its surface in hypnotic patterns. I approached cautiously, looking for an access point. There it was. A small opening, almost hidden among the crystalline formations. With trembling hands, I picked up the device with the virus. I was about to insert it when a voice rang out through the chamber, icy and inhuman. "Welcome, Doctor. Malcolm Hayes, we've been expecting you." I froze, terror paralyzing me. Slowly, I turned around. Before me stood a figure that could only be described as majestic in its horror. A sovereign, but unlike anyone I had ever seen. Bigger, more imposing, his eyes shining with an ancient and cruel intelligence. "Did you really think you could fool us?" The voice continued, each word reverberating in my mind. "We, who have guided your kind since its beginnings." My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. The device was still in my hand, just a few centimeters from the insertion point. "Your resistance is admirable, but futile," the sovereign advanced, each step making the ground tremble. "But perhaps we can reach an agreement." The word agreement echoed in my mind, laden with irony. It was an agreement that started all this, and now the clock on my wrist blinked. There were only 5 minutes left until the catalyst event. I had a choice to make, and the fate of humanity depended on it. Time seemed to distort at that crucial moment. Each second stretched out like an eternity as I stared at the sovereign, my hand still holding the device with the virus mere centimeters from the insertion point. "A deal," I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. "Like the deal you made with our government, the deal that would lead to the enslavement of humanity." The sovereign tilted his head, a strangely human gesture coming from such an alien creature. "You see only a fraction of the bigger picture, Dr. Hayes. Our presence on Earth is not merely about domination. It's about survival, the survival of both our species." Confusion and mistrust fought inside me. "What are you talking about?" "Your planet is dying, Dr. Hayes. Not just by human action, but by cosmic forces beyond your control or comprehension. In less than a century, the Earth will become uninhabitable. We offer a path to survival." My mind was spinning with this new information. Was it possible? Or was it just another manipulation, a trick to make me hesitate? The watch on my wrist blinked insistently. 3 minutes to the catalyst event. What about this catalyst event? I asked, trying to buy time while my brain worked frantically. The purge you have planned. A necessary measure, the sovereign replied, his voice cold and pragmatic. To prepare your species for the transition. Those who oppose progress must be removed for the greater good. I felt a wave of nausea. Genocide. You're talking about genocide. Preservation, corrected the sovereign. But you have a choice, Dr. Hayes. Join us. With your intelligence and knowledge, you could be a crucial link between our species. Help us save what can be saved of humanity. For a moment, the offer was tempting. The promise of knowledge, of power, of a place in the new world order. But then I remembered. I remembered the faces of the resistance, of Sarah, of Robert, who had sacrificed everything for the truth. What if I refuse? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. The sovereign's eyes shone with a cold light. Then you will perish, along with all those who oppose the inevitable. 2 minutes. At that moment, I made my decision. With one swift movement, I inserted the device into the access point. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Deafening alarms echoed throughout the ship. The lights flashed frantically, turning the chamber into a chaotic kaleidoscope. The sovereign roared, a sound that made my bones vibrate with terror. "What have you done?" he roared, advancing towards me. But I was already running like I'd never run before, navigating the pulsating corridors of the ship that now seemed to be in agony. The virus was doing its job, destabilizing the ship's systems and, hopefully, the Sovereign's entire network. 1 minute. I reached the entry point, plunging through the rippling surface into the cold night outside. The city was in chaos. The huge ships in the sky were shaking and flashing, some beginning to fall. "Malcolm!" I heard a shout. It was Rodriguez, waving frantically from the stealth vehicle. I ran towards him, jumping into the vehicle as it accelerated. "Did it work?" he asked, his eyes alternating between the road and the tumultuous sky. "I think so," I gasped, "but it's not over. The catalyzing event." As if in answer, the world suddenly went dark. All the lights in the city went out simultaneously. Rodriguez's car died, sliding to a stop. 0. For a moment, there was absolute, oppressive silence. And then, the sky lit up, not with the lights of the sovereigns from ships, but with explosions. The ships were falling, disintegrating in the atmosphere in spectacular fireballs. "My God," whispered Rodriguez, "we did it." But I knew it wasn't that simple. The sovereign's words echoed in my mind. If he was telling the truth about the fate of the Earth, hours passed in a blur of celebration and chaos. We returned to the resistance base, where we were welcomed as heroes. Sarah hugged me, tears of relief in her eyes. "You did it, Malcolm. You saved humanity." But as everyone celebrated around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. If the sovereigns were telling the truth, we had only postponed our extinction, not avoided it. Days passed. The world slowly began to recover from the shock. Governments fell. The truth about the conspiracy came out. I became a public figure, hailed as the man who exposed the truth and saved the Earth. But at night, alone with my thoughts, I wondered, had we really won, or just exchanged a quick end for a slow death? A month after the event, I received an anonymous package. Inside was an alien storage device and a note. "The truth is more complex than you realize, Dr. Hayes. The choice is still yours." I looked at the device in my hand, feeling the weight of humanity's future once again on my shoulders. The war against the sovereigns might be over, but our fight for survival had only just begun. And I, Malcolm Hayes, once again found myself at the center of it all, with an impossible choice before me. Whatever the future held, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The truth was out there, and it was more terrible and wonderful than any of us could have imagined. The end, or just the beginning?